When you think of Iceland, your first thought may be of a rugged yet beautiful landscape, and maybe the small population of kind people. What you probably won't think of is a country that would wage war with a major naval superpower over some fish. This is that story, the story of the Cod Wars, a series of 20th century confrontations between the United Kingdom and Iceland over fishing rights in the North Atlantic that hold a complex historical significance. These disputes, often referred to as militarized interstate disputes rather than conventional wars, resulted in Icelandic victories in each case. Originating from centuries of competition for fish stocks, the modern Cod Wars began in 1952 when Iceland extended its territorial waters from 3 to 4 nautical miles, prompting the UK to ban Icelandic ships from its ports. In 1958, Iceland unilaterally expanded its waters to 12 nautical miles, leading to a series of confrontations spanning from 1958 all the way through to 1976. These conflicts involved naval escorts, net cutting, and ramming incidents. Ultimately, Iceland emerged victorious, securing a 12 nautical mile exclusive zone around its shores and a 200 nautical mile fishery zone. This marked the end of over 500 years of unrestricted British fishing in these waters, resulting in significant economic impacts on British fishing communities. The Cod Wars, though limited in casualties, reveal the intricate interplay of economic, legal, and strategic factors between Iceland and the UK. These disputes have influenced international relations theory and the development of maritime policies worldwide. The historical backdrop for these conflicts is rooted in the rich fishing grounds of the North Atlantic, which have been a staple in the diets of the British Isles, Iceland, and other Nordic countries for centuries. British fishing vessels have ventured to Icelandic waters since the 14th century, leading to disputes and political tensions between England and Denmark, which governed Iceland at the time. These conflicts persisted through the 16th century and into the late 19th century, driven by advancements in fishing technology. Despite intermittent agreements, tensions simmered, and in 1949, Iceland began the process of abolishing the 1901 agreement between Denmark and the UK, extending its fishery limits. The UK responded with sanctions, but the situation was complicated by Cold War politics, as the Soviet Union and the United States stepped in to purchase Icelandic fish. Eventually, Iceland's 4 nautical mile limits were recognised by the UK. In 1958, the United Nations convened a conference on the law of the sea, laying the groundwork for the establishment of a 12 nautical mile territorial limit, a concept that has become the international standard under the UN Convention of the Law of the Sea since 1982. The First Cod War. The First Cod War, which took place from the 1st of September 1958 to the 11th of March 1961, arose when Iceland unilaterally extended its fishery zone from 4 to 12 nautical miles. This extension was met with opposition from all NATO member states. In response, the British government declared that its trawlers would fish within specific areas under the protection of their warships, including the West Fjords, north of Horn, and southeast of Iceland. A total of 20 British trawlers, 4 warships, and a supply vessel operated within these zones. This deployment incurred significant expenses, with around £500,000 worth of oil expended by February 1960. The Royal Navy's presence in contested waters led to protests in Iceland, and there were numerous incidents between British and Icelandic vessels. The Icelanders faced challenges in patrolling the vast contested waters due to limited patrol ships. The flagship Thor was the most effective vessel for arresting and towing trawlers if necessary. Several confrontations occurred during this period. On September 4th, 1958, the Icelandic patrol vessel, ICGV Aegir, attempted to intercept a British trawler off the West Fjords, but collided with HMS Russell. On October 6th, VS Maria Julia fired shots at the trawler Kingston Emerald, making it flee out to sea. On November 12th, VS Thor encountered the trawler Hackness, which had not properly stowed its nets. After warnings, Thor fired blanks and then a live shell, prompting HMS Russell to intervene. Icelandic captain Eiríkur Kristoffersson ordered his men to approach the trawler with the gun manned, leading to further tensions until more British ships arrived and Thor retreated. In response, the Icelandic government threatened to withdraw from NATO and expel US forces from Iceland unless a satisfactory resolution was reached. Even pro-Western cabinet members resorted to these threats, considering them Iceland's chief leverage. After the United Nations Conference on the Law of the Sea in 1916, the UK and Iceland reached a settlement in late February 1961. This agreement established 12 nautical mile Icelandic fishery limits, while granting Britain fishing rights in specific zones and seasons within the outer 6 nautical miles for 3 years. The Icelandic Parliament approved this agreement on March 11, 1961. The terms of this deal were reminiscent of an offer Iceland had made before its unilateral extension in 1958. The agreement also stipulated that any future disputes between Iceland and Britain regarding fishery zones would be referred to the International Court of Justice in The Hague for resolution. The Second Cod War. These agreements, however, did not have a lasting impact, and about a decade later, tensions flared up once again. The Second Cod War lasted between 1972 and 1973, and once again was a dispute over fishing limits. However, with Iceland this time extending its fishing boundaries to 50 nautical miles, or 93 kilometres, to protect fish stocks and increase its catch share. The UK contested this extension, aiming to secure the highest catch quota for its fishermen and prevent unilateral expansion of fishing jurisdictions. Many Western European states and the Warsaw Pact opposed Iceland's move, while African nations supported it as part of a broader fight against colonialism and imperialism. The conflict escalated on September 1, 1972, when Icelandic patrol ships, ignoring previous agreements, chased British and West German trawlers out of the new 50 nautical mile zone. The Icelandic Coast Guard used net cutters to disrupt non-Icelandic vessels' fishing activities. This conflict strained Iceland's NATO membership and the US military presence on the island, which held strategic importance during the Cod War due to its location in the GI-UK gap. After negotiations with NATO, British warships were recalled on October 3, 1973, and an agreement was signed on November 8th. This resolution limited British fishing to specific areas within the 50 nautical mile limit, capping annual catches at 130,000 tonnes. The agreement expired in November 1975, leading to the start of the Third Cod War. The Second Cod War came close to jeopardising Iceland's NATO membership and the US military presence on the island. It was the closest Iceland came to cancelling its bilateral defence agreement with America. During the conflict, the Royal Navy protected British trawlers using frigates and tugboats. In total, 32 British frigates entered the contested waters over the course of the Second Cod War. The Third Cod War. The interwar period between the Second and Third Cod Wars wasn't entirely peaceful, and an event that helped spark the Third War was the CS Forester incident, which took place on the 19th of July 1974. It saw one of the largest British stern trawlers, fishing within the 12 nautical mile limit, shelled and captured by the Icelandic gunboat VS Thor after a 100 nautical mile pursuit. The trawler was hit by non-explosive ammunition, damaged and towed to Iceland. Skipper Richard Taylor was sentenced to 30 days imprisonment and fined £5,000, over £45,000 today, adjusted for inflation. The incident highlighted the ongoing tensions in the region. The Third Cod War, which took place from November 1975 to June 1976, marked the most intense phase of the ongoing fishing dispute between Iceland and the United Kingdom. Iceland extended its fishing limits to 200 nautical miles from its coast, a move not recognised by the British government. This extension led to conflicts between British fishermen and Icelandic authorities within the disputed zone. Throughout the Third Cod War, British fishing trawlers had their nets cut by the Icelandic Coast Guard, and there were numerous incidents of ramming involving Icelandic ships, British trawlers, frigates and tugboats. One significant event occurred on December 11, 1975. The Icelandic vessel VS Thor, commanded by Helgi Halvarsson, encountered 3 British ships, Lloydsman, a large ocean-going tug, Star Aquarius, an oil rig supply vessel, and Star Polaris. These vessels were sheltering from a force 9 gale within Iceland's territorial waters, about 2 nautical miles from the coast. A confrontation ensued, with Icelandic accounts stating that the British vessels initially complied with orders to leave, but then collided with VS Thor as they attempted to depart. Shots were fired and the British ships retreated. VS Thor was seriously damaged during this confrontation. However, the British reports differed, alleging that the VS Thor had attempted to board one of the British ships and that the Icelandic vessel initiated the collision. In response to these events, the Royal Navy deployed a significant force, including frigates and specialised ramming craft. This deployment aimed to demonstrate the capabilities of older frigates for sustained deployment in the Denmark Strait, where they could deter Soviet submarines. The Royal Navy viewed these conflicts as necessary and strategically important. Another incident occurred in January 1976 when HMS Andromeda collided with VS Thor, resulting in damage to both vessels. The British Ministry of Defence described this collision as a deliberate attack by the Icelandic ship, while Icelandic authorities claimed that the Andromeda had rammed VS Thor. Tragically, on February 19, 1976, a British fisherman from Grimsby was seriously injured when a towing rope hit him after Icelandic vessels cut a trawl. While reports of a British trawlerman being accidentally killed by a solid shot fired by an Icelandic patrol boat surfaced, they were not confirmed by other historical sources. To protect British fishing trawlers, the Royal Navy deployed 22 frigates, reactivated reserve frigates, and converted some into ramming craft with reinforced bows. In addition to frigates, supply ships, tugboats, and support vessels were also dispatched. The Royal Navy was willing to accept considerable damage to its Cold War frigate fleet during these conflicts. The situation escalated to the point where Iceland threatened to close the NATO base at Keflavik, which would have severely impacted NATO's ability to counter the Soviet Union's access to the Atlantic Ocean. Consequently, the British government agreed to have its fishermen stay outside Iceland's 200 nautical mile exclusion zone without a specific agreement. Finally, on the 1st of June 1976, after mediation by NATO, an agreement was reached between Iceland and the UK. Under this agreement, the British were allowed to keep 24 trawlers within the 200 nautical mile limit and fish a total of 30,000 tonnes. The Third Cod War was the most intense of the Cod Wars and led Iceland to sever diplomatic relations with the UK on the 19th of February 1976. Although Iceland was firmly pro-Western, it linked its NATO membership to the outcome of the fishery dispute and implied that it might withdraw from NATO if a favourable resolution couldn't be reached, although it never explicitly tied the US defence agreement to the dispute's outcome. Aftermath and legacy. Iceland achieved its overall aims. As a result, the already declining British fisheries were hit hard by being excluded from historical prime fishing grounds, and the economies of the large northern fishing ports in the United Kingdom, such as Grimsby, Hull and Fleetwood, were severely affected, with thousands of skilled fishermen and people in related trades being put out of work. The cost for repairing the damaged Royal Navy frigates was estimated at over £1 million, over $6.5 million adjusted for inflation. In 2012, the British government offered a multi-million-pound compensation deal and apology to fishermen who lost their livelihoods in the 1970s. More than 35 years after the workers lost their jobs, the £1,000 compensation offered to the 2,500 fishermen was criticised for being insufficient and excessively delayed. The 1976 agreement at the end of the Third Cod War forced the UK to abandon the open seas international fisheries policy it had previously promoted. The British Parliament passed the Fishery Limits Act 1976, declaring a similar 200 nautical mile zone around its home shores, a practice later codified into the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, which provided similar rights to every sovereign nation. The victories in the Cod Wars may have strengthened Icelandic nationalism and boosted the perception that Iceland can succeed through unilateral or bilateral means, rather than compromise in multilateral frameworks such as membership of the European Union. The Cod Wars are often mentioned in Icelandic and British news reporting when either state is involved in a fishery dispute, or when there are disputes of any sort between the two countries. In February 2017, the crew of two ships involved in the Cod Wars, the hull trawler Arctic Corsair and the Icelandic patrol ship Odin, exchanged bells in a gesture of goodwill and a sign of friendship between the cities of Hull and Reykjavik. The event was part of a project by Hull Museums on the history between Iceland and the United Kingdom during and after the Cod Wars. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, then please give it a like, and for more amazing tales and thrilling stories, don't forget to subscribe to Uncovered Secrets. Also, hit the bell icon to stay notified for every release.